Hello friends, you're listening to Ask Lada podcast. Get early access and Lada Ray's exclusive content by subscribing to patreon.com/Lada Ray.
Hello everyone, Lada and us here. Today we are in our beautiful park and we were resting under the tree and we just lied down and recharged under the tree. Then we started walking around. It's a beautiful, gorgeous park, wonderful day. We have this wonderful marina around us. And so I said, after we got up and started taking another walk, wow, I'm so relaxed. I had such a good time here. It felt like home. And usually I do not feel like home, where I live, and don't feel that relaxed. And Oz said, well, you mean like at home in the garden? Why do you not lie down like this in the grass in the garden more often if it feels like home? And I said, oh no, what I meant by home was actually Odessa. And he started laughing. He says, what a difference 30 years make. And yes, I lived in Odessa, which is currently Ukraine, but it was part of the USSR, and we always considered it administratively Ukraine, but in reality it was always a part of Russia. Russian culture, Russian language, Russian mentality, all the way. And so we never felt separate from Russia or from Moscow. Moscow was our capital, not Kiev. And then they separated in 1991. Of course, by then, I was already in the US. And so for me, it was not something that I felt acutely or felt personally. I just commiserated and felt very compassionate towards people who were stuck that way. And then it was worse and worse and worse. But it still felt like two brothers or two sisters, Russia and Ukraine, were slightly apart, but were still together. And then we had 2014, and we had the coup in Kyiv Maidan. Before that, no matter how they tried, they could not separate the two. And in 2014, they finally succeeded. So Oz's comment really brought it home for me. And so when he said, oh, so home is in fact Odessa. But what a difference, don't you say, that it is a completely different place right now. It calibrates so badly compared to how nicely it calibrated when I lived there before 1990. It was calibrating really highly. I demonstrated those calibrations for you guys in my EARTHSHIFT reports and some other occasions. And I also compared them to you. I'm not going to do it right now. These quantum calibrations right now are horrific for Odessa and entire Ukraine, any place in Ukraine. It actually calibrates on the level of grief, and it's a horrible drop in calibrations. It's like night and day. It's like another galaxy. It's like not even close to what I remember. And I have such wonderful memories that I, in fact, don't want to go back there. That's how good my memories are, because all that will happen if I go back there, I will spoil them. And so as I'm continuing to walk through this park, I'm going to tell you this story. So this conversation with Oz prompted this recording, this podcast. What I want to tell you is that you probably on some level already understand this and know this, but this is a really important point to make. And I want to bring it home. The reason Kyiv Maidan happened, and the reason it was possible to create that rift that is very hard to heal right now between Russia and Ukraine is one reason only. It is not because Russia made mistakes and did not work as closely as they should with Ukraine. Sure, Russia made mistakes, everybody made mistakes, but there is one factor that you cannot deny and cannot escape here. And this one single factor is the foreign interference, is foreign aggression into the affairs of Ukraine and Russia. So it worked in a twofold way, US and those countries that worked with it. And I primarily have to single out Canada and Poland. To a lesser degree, Germany and EU as a whole. But the first and foremost, that's US, then it's Canada and Poland. Probably Poland and then Canada, or the other way around. These three, plus EU, and Germany to a degree as the lead country of the EU. So what happened was that they did it twofold. The attack was twofold. And it lasted for over 20 years, possibly over 30 years. It was a continuous attack after attack and attack. And what they did inside Ukraine, they subverted those layers of the population and elites that were instrumental in forming public opinion. And these are MSM, all sorts of journalists. Also, these are teachers and professors. Any schools, books, school books, college books, programs, education, including taking people out of Ukraine into US, into Canada, into Poland, wining and dining them there, bribing them that way, and teaching them how nice it is over there and how bad it is in Ukraine. And why is it bad in Ukraine? The conclusion was because it is in leagues with Russia. And while it is with Russia, it will never be good. Once you change direction, Ukraine, and go with us and become one of us and orient yourselves towards the West, then your life will become much, much better. We see from what has happened in Ukraine that it's the other way around. It's actually the absolute opposite of what was promised, but they simply cannot stop anymore. So in addition to that, they subverted elites. Those are political elites, again, with lavish trips abroad, with all sorts of bribes, and those bribes were monetary and non-monetary. They were tangible and not tangible as well. Invitations to come somewhere, rub shoulders with the powerful and mighty. And also they subverted financial elites and oligarchs of Ukraine. So that was sufficient. Another layer of the population that they targeted extremely successfully were Western Ukrainian, Ukro-Nazi, Bandera-leaning people. Those who remember that there was Bandera, that at some point there was resistance against Russia and the Soviet Union there. In fact, their lives and their understanding of what really went on in the past are very confused, and they're based on a lot of brainwashing by both their parents, their own local propaganda, and the West. And I'm not going to go very deep into this except to say that there are a lot of descendants of Ukro-Nazis presently living in the US and Canada. They specifically targeted and went to Canada because there was a lot of land there, and most of these people were peasants. They actually dreamt about having their own farms. So they were buying up land, and that was with the money stolen from during World War II, when they committed war crimes, from locals, from Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, and Jews who lived in Western Ukraine. So these are Western Ukrainians who in fact escaped justice because a lot of them were in fact war criminals. A lot of them settled in Canada and they still live there, and they deny that they are any sort of war criminals. They depict themselves as poor victims of the Soviet Union or something like that. Same in the US. So there are these stories in the US, supposedly US trumpeted that just recently. I believe Trump personally trumpeted, no pun intended, that recently they expelled the last Ukro-Nazi Bandera war criminal out of the US, and that guy was about 96 years of age, and they had to carry him out, and as they were carrying him and moving him out of his house to throw him out of the country at 96 years of age, he was doing this, he obviously was in pain. So they basically offered to throw him back to Ukraine. Ukraine refused to take him. They offered to throw him back to Poland because he committed crimes against Polish citizens. Because part of where Ukro-Nazis operated together with German Nazis during World War II was Western Ukraine, and part of it was Poland, in fact. So Poland also refused to take him. And what are they going to do with him at that age? So Germany took him in and put him in a senior citizen home because he's actually too old to stand trial. And how does US look after this? What a wonderful country. Got rid of the last criminal. You know, I can tell you, they did not get rid of not only the last criminal, that was just for show, just to appease the Jews, because some Jewish organizations demanded something, they found out something. But you know, not far from where we live, but one place in New York State, we saw with our own eyes that there is a 5K run to benefit the Bandera family. And who was Bandera? The founder of the Ukro-Nazi movement. I'm sorry, if you are hearing a little bit of noise in the background, that's actually people playing soccer. We're in the park after all, so don't pay attention. Anyway, so to benefit the Bandera family, I'm not saying that Bandera family are relatives of the Bandera who committed unspeakable crimes and killed, together with his cronies during World War II, hundreds of thousands of people in Western Ukraine. I'm not saying that family is related, but just to tell you, to illustrate to you, that's a typical Western Ukrainian last name. Nowhere else in Ukraine anybody calls them Bandera. And actually nobody would, because the name has been very suspect. Nobody would want to be called in the previous times. Well, right now, Bandera is the national hero of Ukraine. That actually tells you how far they're gone in this direction. So when Soros, U.S. State Department, Canada, Canadian Foreign Ministry, incidentally, Canadian Foreign Minister right now, Chrystia Freeland, if I'm not mistaken. Chrystia, real Ukrainian, Western Ukrainian specifically name. And Freeland, of course, is not her real name. She assumed that name after moving to Canada, or her ancestors rather, apparently assumed this name after moving to Canada. And her grandfather, or great-grandfather, don't hold me to this, has been, in fact, a collaborator. And he was a serious collaborator. He was editor-in-chief of a leading Lvov newspaper or magazine. And that publication, in fact, glorified German Nazism, concentration camps, and there are also rumors that he also gave away partisans and Jews and people who were hiding out. That he actually gave them up to the regime and they were sent to concentration camps to their deaths. So there is a rumor about that. I don't know, I did not investigate it personally, but some other investigators insist that her great-grandfather was complicit in these things. And that's the story. That's Canadian Foreign Minister currently, right now. And why there is such a Canadian Foreign Minister? Because they needed somebody who would be really proficient on Ukraine, because Ukraine is their priority. And you say, whoa, why would Ukraine be Canada's priority? Very simple. Canada is completely in bed with the US, and US is in bed with Canada. It's a mutual thing. And at the very same time, and that's despite their little squabbles about trade wars and tariffs, etc., but they geopolitically are. And we all woke up one day to the fact that those descendants of Ukro-Nazis who were quiet, seemingly quiet for years, that they acquired a ton of influence in Canada and even in the US. And in the next podcast, which we will be talking about the impending schism in the Russian Orthodox Church, and a very, very difficult situation which could lead to the global religious war. That's how bad it is. And we will talk about it in a separate podcast. I will prove to you how the influence of Ukro-Nazis is actually strong in the US State Department and the White House. But just hold that thought till next podcast.
Lada, do you want to also talk about and mention the 80s and 90s about the intelligentsia class and neoliberalist movement and how that...
Yes, there was, you mean in the Soviet Union, yes. Right? In the Soviet Union, intelligentsia was pro-Western. I understood that being myself a member of said intelligentsia and coming from that stock myself, I understood this only relatively recently. And I did not understand it at the time that I, in fact, lived in the USSR. I felt that that was like the best place to be, the best class to belong to, that people were smart, intelligent, compassionate. But just like neoliberals here in the US or in the West in general, they are completely confused. They take a direction and keep running in that direction, and then they cannot stop. They simply cannot change their mind. They're not capable of dealing with the facts that where the reality lies. You know, other classes, whether they're conservatives or somebody else, they're capable of changing their minds. They're not as stuck in one dimension, in one reality, which they assume for themselves, what they painted for themselves, and now they simply cannot come out of it. So what we have here, in fact, going back to our whole situation, that of course also this intelligentsia thing is a separate discussion, but it did not help this general direction which Russia took and which Ukraine took in the 90s. And the confusion in Russia was cleared up because the right people came to power in Russia. And they started turning the situation around. And Putin turned around the situation so wonderfully, so magnificently, that it's day and night compared to the 90s. And Ukraine got worse, meanwhile. Other ex-Soviet republics actually learned some of the lessons. And if they did not get worse, except for Georgia and the Baltics, at least they are trying not, if they did not get better, I'm sorry, except for Georgia and the Baltics, at least they're trying not to get worse. At least they're trying to stay more or less even. And some are getting better. This is a very separate discussion. Oh, how nice. People are waving to us from the boat. Hi! And nice ducks here. So we are distracted a little bit by this. But I want to bring home this point, which is supremely important to understand. If not for the US, together with the rest of the West, none of this would have happened, regardless of what mistakes Russia made, regardless of intelligentsia, regardless of the oligarchs and the political class. If Ukraine did not get the support, the necessary support from the West, and support was like this: internally, they bribed, wined, and dined who they wanted. They wanted to do that with certain people, and they did it. Okay, and those people were subverted, and then they carried these messages to the masses. They started subverting the young generations through school programs. And those young generations, they grew up like this. Those who participated in the Maidan, those who are presently in this Aidar and Azov Nazi battalions in the right sector, in all the Svoboda, Ukronazi Svoboda and stuff, all these people, in fact, have been subverted. They are 20-year-olds. They have not seen what it was like during Soviet days, when everybody lived together, when everybody was the same, when everybody understood that they were brothers and sisters. Right now, for them, Russia is the enemy, is very separate. That's how they were taught, through school, through some of their churches, maybe activities as well. Politicians told them that, MSM told them that, and now it's actually very hard to change that. People just blinked and they did not see that. And that was an absolutely planned, pre-planned mission coming from the US. US wanted to do that. This is the Brzezinski plan. This is Brzezinski master plan to tear Ukraine away from Russia. This was in the works since the 70s and the 80s. And this is what's implemented. It was necessary, according to Brzezinski, to build an rebuild an iron curtain, and always keep that iron curtain from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Then they tried to extend it into Caspian, and they partially succeeded with Georgia, but only very partially. They tried to do it with Azerbaijan and Armenia, as well as Turkey, which would complete the Iron Curtain. They failed with Turkey completely, absolutely miserably failed with Turkey. They failed with Armenia so far. They are not really succeeding with Azerbaijan. They only succeeded with Georgia. Okay, Georgia is just as bad or nearly as bad as Ukraine right now. Perhaps only Ukraine can be as bad as Ukraine. But they need this Iron Curtain, and to complete it, they need Poland and Ukraine, which, if you look at the map, you will see that that's your axis between Baltic and Black Sea. It actually cuts off Russia from Europe. It cuts off Russia from Germany and other strong countries of Western Europe. And this is the nightmare of the US and Canada, which is in bed with the US, of both of them, as well as of Poland too. When Russia and Germany get together, Russia and Germany getting together, to them that's a nightmare, because that becomes a powerhouse. And then from there on, there is China. Okay, so this triumvirate, this triangle of the most powerful and very well complementing each other countries, three countries: Germany, Russia, and China. That's it. That's the death of the neoliberal globalist NWO model, the absolute death of it. That's why they can never allow it. So while they were extremely busy trying to distract Germany and separate Germany from Russia, Poland is deathly afraid of Germany and Russia coming together, because Poland always has this inferiority complex. It's located exactly between the two. And it was always the least successful of the three, if you compare them. Seemingly also a pretty large country that Poland is, but as the size of Germany, but they were always at odds with all of their neighbors, especially the powerful neighbors, both east and west. That's why they are a natural, absolutely natural ally and vassal to the US in this regard. That's why Poland did absolutely everything and more, and then some, and even more, not to allow Germany and Russia to come together. They partially are succeeding, but Nord Stream 2 is still ongoing. They officially started now building Nord Stream 2. The construction just began just a week ago. So that was part of it. Okay, they absolutely had to build that Iron Curtain. They partially succeeded with Ukraine, but they're not succeeding to the extent that they wanted to. They also wanted to tear Crimea away from Russia, and of course, as I predicted in 2014, this would have never happened. Donbass, that would never happen either. Odessa will never succumb. You know, Odessa may pretend like it's falling asleep, like it's not doing anything, but Odessa will never succumb. You know, so now they will be doing other things like depopulation of Ukraine and subversion and conversion, etc. But that will be another piece. That's not today. Today, I want to emphasize a second, as important of an ingredient of their strategy. So together with generating, well, basically it's three-prong, okay? Iron Curtain, which is Brzezinski model. Okay. Second, subverting Ukraine from within through elites, through MSM, through school books, etc. Soros was right into it. US, Canada, UK was also in it, of course, Poland. All these trainings, all these new books, and lavish trips, and much more. And the State Department was in it all the way. So that's the second thing, you know, bribes to the government officials or threats, direct threats. Same with oligarchs, either bribes or threats, bribes, threats, you know, carrot and stick, all the time. So they subverted enough population plus Ukro-Nazis, Western Ukraine, with training camps in Poland, all that is very well known, or even in Western Ukraine itself. Of course, Ukrainian government, it was Yanukovych, who was an idiot, made tons of mistakes, and one of the mistakes was, well, huge mistakes in fact, was that he was allowing the proliferation of Ukro-Nazi and this right-wing pro-Nazi sentiment in Ukraine, because he thought, just imagine this brilliant train of thought that these idiots have. He thought if people see how those Ukro-Nazi forces are proliferating, they will get scared and vote for Yanukovych and again vote him into power. Well, little did he know, sure, he was voted in, but they did Maidan and they simply would have killed him if he did not flee the country on time. So, you know, so he created his Frankenstein monster, and that monster almost ate him up, basically ate him up. So that's the second ingredient, the subversion from within. And the third ingredient was the most insidious one, and that one was missed practically by everybody. And I would say practically by everybody. And in their own very dark, disgusting way, it was in fact a very brilliant situation, how they created it. What they did, when people inside Ukraine saw what was coming, that Ukro-Nazis were upon them, that everything was changing, and started protesting and started trying to legally or through any means that were available to them, because people were not armed there, when they tried to change the situation and somehow safeguard their own local regions against Ukro-Nazis, they needed help from Russia. And what US did, together with EU, together with Canada, Poland, Germany, Brussels, but primarily US, what they did, they blocked Russia completely from helping Ukrainian pieces of Ukraine that wanted to secede or wanted some sort of autonomy or independence because they were scared of Ukronazis. They blocked Russia. The only region that Russia was able to safeguard due to the location, which was very beneficial because it connects only via 2 roads and a very small sliver of land, was Crimea. And I predicted that from the very, very start, very beginning of 2014, that that's what's going to happen, and that Crimea, in fact, is the only region that can be protected that simply and that easily. All other places that equally were deserving, such as Odessa and Nikolaev and Kherson and Kharkov and Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporozhye and, of course, Donbass, which is Donetsk and Lugansk, all these places had a situation where there was a lot of land they had to protect. So that required basically an intervention. Also, don't forget that legally in Crimea, there were about 16,000 Russian troops and 20,000 Ukrainian troops in 2014. That was legally based on a sharing of bases agreement between Yeltsin and Ukraine. And the majority, the vast majority, I should say, of Ukrainian troops actually resigned, went with the Russian army, became part of the Russian army. That's how powerful, that was an example of how powerful the influence of Russia was in Crimea. Same would have happened, or something very similar would have happened in other places in Ukraine if US did not interfere. And again, I have to stress, it's about 85% US, and then the rest would be everybody else who were helping US, all those vessels, all those poodles, etc. But if US did not interfere at that point and didn't threaten Russia on all fronts with sanctions, with all kinds of things that were most of them unspoken, we will never know, and I'm not even going to tell you, I'm not even going to guess, or I'm not going to even hint on them. But believe me, threats were so powerful, so big, that Russians simply could not do it. They simply could not do it. They could not just intervene. And I predicted that in 2014, that Russia would never send troops to Ukraine. And so what we have right now is that Ukronazis actually invaded all those regions and cities that were never even close to that were always completely pro-Russian, such as Odessa and Kharkov and Dnipropetrovsk and others. They completely invaded them, they squashed the opposition, many people were forced to flee, and all this was done because US protected the culprits, because US protected and encouraged Kiev junta. They also learned their lessons from what happened in Georgia, when Georgia tried to attack South Ossetia in 2008 and got their teeth kicked out and lost 1/3 of their territory, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, because of how Russia acted. And all that happened within 4 days. But the thing is that Ukraine is a completely different story. And so, unfortunately, that situation when US interfered and continues interfering and continues blocking Russia from helping those pro-Russian elements through threats, because USA possesses a lot of instruments. They're financial instruments. They are clandestine instruments. There are, things like spies, sabotage, terrorist acts, and they can trigger certain things that would be very, very serious for any country. Be it Russia or any other country. For China, it would be just as serious, and China is a lot bigger economy than Russia. Well, obviously, because there is 145 million people in Russia and over 1.5 billion people in China. And the Russian economy was all but destroyed in the 90s, obviously. Putin had to pick up the pieces. So all my predictions in that regard came true, except one, that Ukraine will turn back to Russia by the end of 2018. See, this is not coming true, as you see. It actually is getting worse. And this is because we progressed into another timeline. This is because the factor of the US interfering to such a brazen degree, together with Poland, Canada, which incidentally was very quiet for a while about its interference, but right now it's all coming out. It's all becoming more and more clear how much Canada has interfered. It's unbelievable, actually. Canadian interference has not actually been discussed to the degree that it deserves to be discussed and condemned, because Canada is hiding behind the US back. UK is right up there, and UK in many cases is actually worse than the US as far as its relations with Russia. We see it from the Skripal cases and the Syria situation and all that. So what we have right now, the timeline has changed. Okay, so the prediction, my 2014 prediction that Ukraine will turn back to Russia, there are attempts of doing that in various regions of Ukraine. And people do want to turn back to Russia, many, many people. In fact, whenever there is a poll in Ukraine, it always comes back with the result that Putin is the most powerful and influential politician in Ukraine, that the majority of Ukrainians want to be with Russia, that the majority of Ukrainians do not want to have a separate church from Russia, etc., things like that. And yet they persist and persist and persist, and they continue pushing the country into NATO, despite the fact that the population is unhappy with it. The majority of the population is against it. They are continuing to push Ukraine towards EU. Now they want to build bases of NATO countries in Ukraine, which the population, for the majority of the population, that's a personal insult when that happens. Many, many things are happening in Ukraine. You know, we will continue discussing, we'll do other podcasts, because the situation is very grave. It is extremely, extremely difficult. And Russia had to make choices. When Russia was blocked by dark forces, and I'm not exaggerating here when I say absolute dark forces, the absolute darkness, you could not get any darker than that, from the West, and especially from the US, and again, the usual culprits, we are going in circles here, Poland, Brussels, UK, and Canada. Well, and Germany participated in that too, to its own detriment, incidentally. When all this is happening, Russia is forced to see other ways of rebalancing the situation. So Russia works where Russia can, and that would be in the Middle East, that would be in Asia, that would be in Africa to a degree. It would be through building Nord Stream 2 and many, many other things. And those would be separate topics, but you have to understand that Russia has to kind of, like water has to flow around an obstacle. So that's how Russia has to work, around that obstacle that was created. And to conclude this whole episode, I'm going back to Brzezinski and to the Eurasian doctrine. So the Eurasian doctrine, expressed by some Russian scientists in the 90s for the first time, it said that Russia has to rebuild something that would be akin to the Commonwealth, not the Soviet Union per se, but like a Commonwealth of Eurasia. And that Russia cannot, again, when Russia was down on her knees in the 90s, that Russia cannot again become a superpower without Ukraine. This Eurasian doctrine, you know, specifically pointed that out. So Brzezinski took that as a gospel. And when he wrote his books and his doctrine, including the Iron Curtain doctrine from the Baltic to the Black Sea and then into Caspian, where it was expanded later, when he wrote that doctrine, he took that into account. So they focused all of their attention, they concentrated all of their attention on Ukraine, on subverting Ukraine. And that started happening in the 80s. Actually, it started happening earlier than that. I'm sure it was since the 50s, as a matter of fact. But it really became a full force and like full-fledged program since late 80s and especially since the 90s. They thought that that would fix all the problems. Guess what? Russia got back from her knees. Russia, again, is a superpower under Putin's tutelage. And there is absolutely no way anybody can deny that he rebuilt the country with the help of his team, with the help of all of us, all of those helpers everywhere, you know, and that's going into my EARTHSHIFT theory and stuff, but this can be another discussion for you all. And now Russia is again a superpower. Nobody can deny it. Nobody can say, oh no, Russia doesn't matter. Everybody needs to talk to Russia. Russia's approval, Russia's opinion, Russia's participation is needed in all the resolution of all global problems. Like all. And even U.S. would not deny that, even though they tried under Obama, but they didn't go anywhere. And so where we have it right now, it turns out Russia can be a superpower very easily without Ukraine. But Ukraine is still a humongous thorn in Russia's side. And this will always be the case because Ukraine is so important to Russia emotionally and from the kinship perspective, but not really from the economic perspective or political perspective, as you see. Russia can function even having such an enemy by its side who is completely unreasonable and doing a lot of provocations and is very difficult to deal with. Russia can, Russia prefers not to. Like, I prefer absolutely not to. You know, my mother was Ukrainian, my father Russian. To me, that's one people, absolutely one people. As any normal Russian will tell you, and any normal Ukrainian will tell you, they are one people, just with slight differences. Therefore, the timeline change forces Russia to basically flow around the obstacle, which is Ukraine. And this too shall pass eventually, but it will be very difficult. Unfortunately, my prediction from 2014 that before Ukraine turns back to Russia, its economy has to be first destroyed. Ukrainian economy, that is. That came true 200%, not even 100%. I was shocked to see how the self-destruction of the Ukrainian economy is going and going and ongoing and getting worse and worse.
And that's with U.S. life support.
And that's with U.S. life support, because U.S. only gives enough life support so that Ukraine would not die, so it could continue breathing, and so that Ukraine could continue being that thorn in Russia's side. Well, that's the only role that they have for Ukraine, as well as they want the territory. They basically want to tear this territory away from Russia forever. Well, this is not going to happen, but that's another story, and we'll discuss it elsewhere. To conclude, I want to summarize for you what we discussed in this episode. So, USA's threefold tactics is what created the current situation in Ukraine. Very devilish tactics, aided and abetted by several other entities, which I will not repeat who those are. USA's tactics have been, number one, to subvert Ukraine from within. Number two, in complicity with Poland, create an iron curtain from the Baltic to the Black Sea, and if possible, through Black Sea, all the way into Caucasus and into the Caspian. They succeeded only partially with Caucasus, very partially, only with Georgia. And we will keep talking about it. I wrote about it on Patreon, how, in fact, even that partially failed for them. And they actually failed miserably to isolate Russia from the Black Sea, or within the Black Sea, for that matter. They failed with Turkey. They partially failed with Ukraine. They completely failed with Crimea and Donbass. So Russia got the most important point in the Black Sea, which is Crimea. And from there on, the whole situation changes. So what they have now, right now, they have to use Ukraine as a nuclear weapon against Russia. That's all the option they have. But the third thing that they did actually worked out so far, because Russia is the great balancer. Russia needs to balance the world. Russia cannot start a war, because if Russia wanted, Russia could squash Ukraine within several days. You know, Russian troops would be in Lvov and by the Hungarian and the Slovak border in no time. Everybody recognizes that. Ukraine knows it, Russia knows it, US knows it, everybody knows this. Russia would not start a war. Russia would not go directly to war against Kiev junta. That I said in 2014, it remains so unless Ukraine starts a war against Russia, open war. Well, then, of course, all bets are off. Then Russia will definitely go in and squash Ukraine. That's why Kiev junta wouldn't do that. When I say Ukraine, I mean Ukrainian Kiev junta. I don't mean the people, because that's another thing. They are, just like any terrorist state, just like ISIS, they're hiding behind the people, behind the peaceful population. They will be using peaceful population as this life deterrent against Russia. They will be hiding behind them so Russians could not act. And that's what they're doing right now. Because terrorists, like in Syria, terrorists, all those ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra terrorists, they're mixed in with the peaceful population. They hide behind them. That's what the Kiev junta is doing with Ukrainian population. They mixed in between with normal people who want to be friends with Russia. And they are deterring the entire country like this and torturing the entire population of Ukraine. Well, Poroshenko is, of course, doing what he's told to do, but that also is in line with his own agenda. He's like that. He's basically devil incarnate. And my apologies to the devil, because I don't know, it's some kind of monster, beast, I don't even know what to call that. Well, this beastly agenda will continue, and there is only one reason for that. Anybody who listens to this and who doesn't know my EARTHSHIFT theory might say, okay, but what is it? Why are they so bent on making it so difficult for Russia? What's so important about Ukraine? And Ukraine, I said, is part of the Russian world, a very important integral part. It's like cutting off one's arm, basically, and then saying, oh, what's so important about that arm? And what's so important about Russia is very simple. Russia is the great balancer. Russia is the country that is doing all that work right now to rebalance the world away from the ill-gotten gains of globalists, where US will have less of an importance, where other countries in the East and elsewhere will get a fair share. This is what Russia is doing. This is what they're so deathly afraid of. And that's what they're doing right now. This is what they're trying to do. They're trying to stave off the end. They're trying to preserve their miserable lives and their miserable advantage. That's what they're working on tirelessly day and night. This is why they want to do this to Russia. They want to do anything they can possibly do to hurt Russia, to annihilate Russia, to destroy Russia. And this will be in other podcasts. But today I just wanted to explain to you what is really going on in Ukraine and why, while the vast majority of my predictions came true, one of them did not come true, that Ukraine will turn back to Russia. Nobody, and even not me, anticipated that US will be so vicious, so adamant. And by US, I mean a lot more than the USA as a country. And certainly not all the people in the US. A lot of people in the US are totally against this kind of policy. I know this. So are people in Canada, so are people in the UK. Some Polish people are fine too. But that doesn't mean anything, because there is what I call dark state, what many people call deep state. There are entrenched interests. There is a globalist movement, there is neoliberalism. They're stuck in their agenda. They don't know how to get unstuck, because that's all they know. There is a lot of darkness, dark energy that comes in through them. And that's part of my multidimensional universe theory. Dark energy coming through them from other dimensions and from this dimension and lower dimensions too. And there are agendas that come in through that from other entities in our universe as well. And all this meshes together. And that's what we have to deal with, all the honest people around the world. That's what Russia has to deal with. This is where we are. And this is the end of our podcast for today.
Well, just one final note. I find it interesting that Trump is consulting with Kissinger to improve relations with Russia.
Trump tried to consult with Kissinger, yes, especially in the beginning. Then this whole agenda got squashed based on... Actually, Trump was even sent my articles and my assessments and predictions, and he also took that into account. And there are some other things that he was sent, like he listened to Alex Jones, for example. Kissinger, who with all his toughness, with his entire, I don't know, this aura of this vicious Russophobe and vicious, I don't even know, conservative globalist, he actually makes sense, and he has half a brain. He actually has a big brain, as a matter of fact. And he understood that in reality, the situation changed. This is the great EARTHSHIFT. He doesn't know my theory. He doesn't understand what EARTHSHIFT means, perhaps. But what he does understand, he has a sixth sense. That's why he was so successful in his political positions and his advisory positions. He understands the world is changing. That's why he proposed something else. What he proposed was, in fact, to do the opposite number of what he himself accomplished under Nixon and afterwards. of tearing China away from Russia. Now he proposed to tear Russia away from China and become friends with Russia, and that's what Trump wanted to do. Well, that didn't work out, and I predicted that it would never work, obviously. So that agenda is off the table right now. And we obviously will talk about this in my Patreon articles and in my future books, because that's a very important part of the agenda, and how this whole triangle, which I wrote about on different occasions, but especially in my book, The EARTHSHIFTer in fictional form, I discussed this triangle, Russia, US, China, through my characters. It was like a hint of things to come, like a preview of things to come. And this is the triangle we're working with. There's also Germany, which could be EU Germany, we could say, as well. There is another force. And there are other forces, there are lesser forces in the world that need to be taken into account. But the primary triangle is USA, China, Russia, or if you will, Russia is the great balancer, USA is the great agitator, and China as the great producer, nurturer, and
economic engine.
Well, economic engine, but I am giving you the terms that are consistent with my EARTHSHIFT theory. But that is a separate story. I will tell you all these things in future podcasts. And so signing off, till next time, this is Lada and us.
Please visit and support me on Patreon, where you'll get much more than just early access to Ask Lada podcast. You'll also get exclusive articles, profound analysis, and unique wisdom, quantum and geocalibrations, 5D EARTHSHIFT, 4D geopolitics, global economy, money and investment, acclaimed Lada Ray predictions, multidimensional universe, and our special advanced multidimensional healing and activation program. And so much more. Join our growing community and support my work to benefit humanity.